Hi, it's Robert Mendelson, Fractional CMO here in beautiful Montreal, welcoming you to another episode of the Fractional Pros Canada podcast. We're part of Fractional Pros Canada, the home for Canada's fractional community, and you can find us on Facebook. We bring you conversations about everything fractional that matters for fractional executives and businesses from coast to coast. Think of this as your go-to spot for real talk, practical wisdom, and strategies you can actually use, all without the corporate fluff and with plenty of Canadian content. Whether you're a fractional pro or a business in our great country of Canada and beyond, this conversation is for you. Grab your espresso and let's dive in. Welcome to the Fractional Pros Canada podcast. I'm your host and fractional CMO, Robert Mendelson, here in beautiful Montreal. Today, we're diving into a topic that's vital for any business looking to scale, which is operating systems, and in particular, EOS. And we have two very qualified guests to guide us today. We have joining us Jennifer Couldrey and Jeremy Robinson, both in Toronto and apparently just down the street from each other. So almost, neighbors. Both as well certified EOS implementers with EOS Worldwide. Today's Fractional Pros Canada podcast is powered by Your CMO, the proven framework for fractional CMOs. Learn more at yourcmo.com. That's YORCMO.com. Jennifer and Jeremy, welcome to the Fractional Pros Canada pod.
Thanks for having us on, Robert.
Yeah, thanks, Robert.
All right. Glad we were able to get this together. I know you guys are always busy. You have a lot of clients. You're constantly helping businesses. So we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of EOS. But first, let's get into a little bit about the backgrounds and how you both got to EOS as part of your career paths where you're at now, because you both come from very different backgrounds. So let's start with you, Jen. You have a deep background in human capital consulting with Deloitte.
Yes.
So tell us about that and how you got to the EOS point in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always been very entrepreneurial. I've started lots of different small businesses and charitable initiatives throughout my life. But I did start my professional career at Deloitte Consulting. I also used to call it, how did you pronounce it? Deloitte?
Deloitte. I guess it's because I'm in Montreal et je parle français, so I have
Oui.
the French pronunciation.
Oui, français. So Deloitte is how we say it here in Toronto. So I started my professional career there, and I was doing work actually very similar to EOS. So I was working with the leadership teams in a larger corporate context. So big banks, big insurance companies, helping those leadership teams to translate their strategies into plans. So what are we focusing on? How are we measuring success? Who's accountable for what? How are we going to work together to get this done? And really enjoyed that work, but really started to get the itch after a while to be in a more entrepreneurial environment. So I started running a national charity that worked with tech startups all across Canada. And I got to work with hundreds of tech startups like Wealth Simple, all across the country on their giving strategies. And it was while I was there that I was on a retreat with other entrepreneurs, and I was venting about the challenges we were facing around having everybody having different opinions of what we should focus on, and feeling like we were working all the time and yet not getting the results we wanted. And somebody on this entrepreneurial retreat suggested I read a book called Traction. I have a few copies here. And so I read Traction, absolutely loved it, started implementing the tools in our organization, and just loved the way it helped us to really get aligned on what we were focusing on and streamline the way we were doing things so I could step out of the day-to-day, let the team focus on execution, and just loved it so much that I decided to become an EOS implementer. And that was just over 3 years ago now. So it's been quite a journey.
All right, Jeremy, how about you?
Yeah, so I came across EOS as a business owner. So I ran an agency for about 13 years and started essentially as a freelance design practice. And then within a few years, I had about 15 employees. And, on the surface, looked like everything was going great because we were growing. We had some big clients. We were working with some of Canada's top corporations. And I think the work we were doing was good. But the truth is we'd grown fairly quickly. And if you scratched beneath the surface, there was like a lot of chaos in the business. And as we were growing our top line, my bottom line was shrinking. And at one point, I was actually getting quite concerned that we were going to like grow right out of business because we were taking on bigger projects, bigger risks. And I just happened to be, this is about 2012, I happened to be at a conference in Tampa, and a guy named Mike Payton put on a workshop for a small group of digital agencies that were there. At the time, he was the visionary of EOS Worldwide, and yeah, I don't think the visionary of EOS Worldwide does that anymore, but EOS was still small enough at that time that we got it straight, kind of straight from the leader, and immediately just saw how this was exactly what was standing in the way of me actually, getting a lot more control over the business. So I implemented EOS successfully in that business. And then a few years later, my wife had started up a consumer products brand kind of while she was at home initially with young kids. And it started to get a little bit of traction. So I taught her EOS, and she kind of became like my first client. And then eventually I started working in that business. So we used EOS in both of those businesses. It made a huge difference. And I, by that point, was really an evangelist for EOS and was sharing it with a lot of other businesses. So when I eventually stepped away from that business that my wife and I were running, this was just the natural next step for me. So yeah, I've been around EOS for like over 10 years. I've seen it work in the businesses that I ran, and I just, there's very few things you encounter in life where it's just like, this is not a sales pitch. This is actually like the nuts and bolts of how you run a business. And it was such a sort of a revelation for me that it just, I couldn't not share it, even as a, just as a practitioner. So getting to do it as a living is just a privilege for me at this point.
And to tie it all together, my first exposure to EOS is when I was a member of EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, which a lot of people sometimes think the EO in EOS stands for Entrepreneurs Organization. There's a relationship, but not quite that.
Yeah.
And so when I was in EO for about 10 years, that's when I started coming across other entrepreneurs who were running on the EOS operating system. So that's how I first came into contact with it, got it on my radar, and that was probably almost 20 years ago now. So very familiar with EOS, but there may be listeners here, there may be fractionals who are new to the space. There may be business owners or C-suite execs who have maybe heard of EOS, but aren't quite sure what it is. So can you guys give us the skinny on what is EOS in a nutshell? What does it do? What does it stand for? And what's it all about? And why is it so awesome?
Go ahead, Jen.
Sure, I'll kick us off and then hand it over to you, Jeremy. You can fill in the blanks from where I left off. So EOS stands for the Entrepreneurial Operating System, and at its very heart, it is a simple system of tools based on timeless principles that really is designed to help business owners get everything they want from their businesses. And the way that we do that is by helping them to get better at three things that we call vision, traction, and healthy. So vision is all about making sure that you and your leadership team are 100% on the same page with where you're going and how you plan to get there. Traction is all about helping you to put in place tools so that everywhere you look in the business, people are focused on the right stuff and are executing with discipline to get you where you want to go. And healthy is about helping you to build that really healthy team culture where people feel comfortable speaking openly and honestly. You are a cohesive team that works well together, has fun together, and gets stuff done. So we start that work with the leadership team, but ultimately get to the point where every single person in the business is aligned with the vision, rowing in the same direction, executing with focus and discipline and accountability to get you traction, and part of that really healthy team culture. What did I miss, Jeremy?
No, I think you nailed it. The one thing I like to point out sometimes, because there's a little bit of confusion when people hear operating system, EOS is not software. It is, maybe you could think of it as mental software, where it is like a meta system for keeping track of everything in the business. But there's just some confusion sometimes around that. There is some auxiliary software to help you manage some of your EOS product. But let's just be clear that these are timeless tools and principles that have been around for, the last 100 years of business. They're going to be around probably forever. So there's nothing revolutionary here. This is just a really cohesive, coherent, holistic package and set of language based tools that give you a common language on how you're going to run the business.
And I got to ask this question. So I hired, when I was running a digital transformation a few years back, at one point I hired a Scrum Master, and she spoke Scrum like 24 hours a day, to the point where she told us that she actually runs her personal life at home. She has a Scrum board at home. She uses Jira for her personal life. It drives her husband kind of nuts, but she was just all in. Do you guys run your lives on EOS as well, or do you just stick to it in the professional lane with clients? I'm curious.
It's a great question, Robert. I definitely dabble in it at home. We certainly have, so one of the tools that we use at EOS is called a VTO, the Vision Traction Organizer, and it's a sort of a 2-page strategic planning document. We have a personal family version. So my husband and I do that around New Year's every year. We sit down and review it, and we talk about what are our family's core values? What are we really passionate about? What is our vision for what our lives look like in 3 years from now? What are our top priorities for the year ahead? What are we going to focus on for this quarter? And it just helps us to have a conversation to get aligned around priorities, how we're spending our time, how we're spending our money. And we try to maintain that discipline throughout the year, although I'm not as disciplined as I am with my clients. What about you, Jeremy? Do you use any of the tools personally?
Yeah, I mean, I run my practice, even though I'm essentially a practitioner, not an entrepreneur, in as much as, my goal is not to scale my practice to have dozens of employees. That's kind of the beauty of what we do, is we are practitioners. But I do use the tools in my EOS practice. I have heard of other people like Jen being very rigorous about even creating family mission statements and so on. So there's two levels. There's the professional side and there's the personal side, and those do tend to blend a little bit in EOS, where we talk about something called the EOS life. The life of an EOS implementer is essentially an entrepreneurial way of living, in as much as we're entirely responsible for generating our clients and managing our practice. But yeah, it is, the tools again are like, we'd be silly not to use what's staring us in the face. I think it almost through osmosis makes sense. We have as a community, we meet quarterly as a EOS community. So all of the implementers come together on a quarterly basis for what we call collaborative exchanges. So in those collaborative exchanges, we're expected to talk about our quarterly rocks, what we accomplished, what our revenue and profit goals were, and so on. So it is kind of baked into our model. Obviously, EOS as an organization runs on EOS, and we as members of that organization adopt those tools. And I mean, if I can say one unsolicited plug, EOS, one of the secret sauces of EOS is the community they've built around the implementer. So the implementer community is very strong, and there's a lot of knowledge sharing that goes on in the background, where we support each other as we're growing our practices and just dealing with the stuff that comes up in the day-to-day of working with our clients. And the VTO, having a strong VTO and having the tools in place supports all that.
Okay, and let's clarify some terminology as well. So
Sure.
You've mentioned the word implementer. A lot of people have heard the word integrator. And then there's the word visionary, which was mentioned at the beginning as well. So could you define how those all go together, but how they're different as well?
Go ahead, Jen.
Sure. So I think this is one of the biggest ahas that can be really liberating for entrepreneurs when they come across EOS, is learning about the differentiation between a visionary and an integrator. So many people who are entrepreneurs or CEOs think they have to do it all. And that's really hard because we're not naturally gifted at doing all of the things. So the way that we think about it at EOS is that there is typically a visionary in place who tends to be the founding entrepreneur. They are big picture thinkers. They are good, they come up with a ton of ideas. They tend to be really good at managing big relationships, in tune with industry trends. They are not so good at the hold the feet to the fire, focused, disciplined execution side of things. So what's really incredible is when a visionary brings in an integrator who helps them focus on execution. So the integrator is typically the person who is accountable for execution of the business plan. They are focused on driving accountability, on resolving conflict, on being sort of the tiebreaker, the decision maker. And when you bring together that really strong visionary who's bringing in really amazing ideas, and then the really strong integrator who's making sure the team is executing on the right ideas, that is what creates rocket fuel in the business. So that's visionaries and integrators in the business, running the business. We as implementers are coaches who sit on the side. Our job is to help companies implement EOS. So we teach them how to implement EOS. We coach them along the journey to help them figure out where they're doing things that are not aligned to where they say they want to go. And we help facilitate the human energy on the team. So we sit outside of the business, whereas the integrator is the one in the business running the business day to day.
I had a business partner once, and day one, we sit down and he says to me, Robert, there's something you need to know. I'm a great visionary, but I suck at execution.
And it is so liberating when people get to know that about themselves, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, one of the biggest breakthroughs for a visionary is when they have a great integrator. And sometimes that doesn't happen right away because an integrator, if they're really good, is actually to a certain extent managing that visionary. They have to manage that energy, which can create chaos in the organization if it's not managed correctly. Because visionaries tend to live in the future. And what'll happen is on Monday, they'll have an idea. Maybe it's even a good idea. And they'll say, okay, team, here's what we're doing. And on Wednesday, they come back and they say, well, actually, team, you know that idea I had on Monday? I got a better idea. Scrap that idea. We're doing Wednesday idea. And then all of a sudden, the whole organization is suffering from whiplash. So a strong integrator has to be able to stand up to that and say, hey, whoa, whoa, whoa. Don't even share that idea with the team. Let's put it on our issues list. We'll talk about it. They're essentially managing that energy, that creative energy. So there's a natural tension there, which can be very powerful when it's managed properly. But if there's a weak integrator, or, you know, in some cases we have a visionary integrator, like he hasn't even found an integrator, you know, it takes a lot longer and it's a lot harder to do this work. So it really is a key relationship. It's foundational to really making this work, I would say. And yeah, the integrator implementer, even we mix those words up because they just are similar, but that's unfortunate. But yeah, I think Jen did a great job of explaining the distinction.
Yeah, it's an important difference. So back to that example where my business partner was the visionary, and back to what you just related, Jeremy, as an experience. In my experience, so I was the integrator. He was the visionary, except your example was the visionary changes ideas a few days later. In my case, Monday, 8 a.m., it was idea A. Monday, 8:35 a.m., it was, oh, no. How about we do this? Yeah. And by noon every day, there were about 5 to 10 new ideas. It was a constant flow. And so,
you know, it really is helpful to name it, because visionaries just don't have the language to understand what they're doing and how it negatively impacts the business. They may have plenty of good ideas. It's just that the business just can't digest all of those ideas. And once they get that, they tend, not always, but it's often a process, but they can get a lot better at self-regulating. They can start calling themselves on that stuff. And it's just creating this distinction is super powerful for visionary founders. You know, they tend to be on to the next project. They like starting things. They don't like finishing them. And we just acknowledge that. We don't call it wrong. There's nothing wrong with it. It just needs to be managed.
Okay, let's move away from knocking visionaries.
We love visionaries. I'm a visionary. Fortunately, Jen is an integrator, so we're a pretty well-rounded team if it were the two of us. But yeah, and I will a prop to integrators. Integrators in some ways are good. Integrators are in many ways harder to find than visionaries. There's a lot of visionaries looking for integrators out there. So if you're an integrator, please raise your hand.
So there's but it's, you know, as they say, there's a lot of people with great ideas out there, but
right.
it's all in the execution, right?
Correct.
So 25 people could have the next $1 billion idea, but it's only the person who figures out a way to execute it that's going to win that game.
Exactly.
Absolutely. All right, so let's talk about the ideal client for EOS. Is the EOS system, operating system, is it really applicable to any kind of business, any size, any vertical, or are there, like, let's say, good candidates for it and better candidates for it?
I love the way you just said that, the good and better. I think that's a great way of putting it. I mean, fundamentally, EOS is a system for managing human energy, right? So whether that's on an individual level, getting aligned on what your priorities and goals are, getting aligned on the key activities you need to focus on every week, that's valuable if you are a solopreneur, right? But EOS is not designed for that kind of company. So yes, it can be useful, not designed for that, not optimized for that. What EOS is designed for is companies with between 10 and 250 employees. So they're out of startup phase. They know who they are. They have product market fit. They are generating revenue. They are live businesses in the community with a team, but they've reached that point where things are starting to get a bit chaotic. And that startup mode, that startup energy of everybody jumps in and helps out where it needs to be isn't working anymore. It's no longer serving them. So it's typically at that point between 10 and 250 that things are just a bit too chaotic, and they say we need to bring more discipline, more structure, more process, graduate from being teenagers to being running this business like a grown-up. That is the point at which a company tends to be the best fit for EOS. The analogy I love to use is, I have young kids, and I have a 4-year-old son who plays soccer. When 4-year-olds play soccer, everybody runs around the field chasing the ball. When professional soccer teams play soccer, everybody knows their spot and they know their role and they stay in it, right? That is when a company is ready for EOS, when they're ready to stop playing playing the game of business like 4-year-olds and ready to start playing like a pro soccer team.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I'll just add, we say they also must be growth-oriented, open-minded, and willing to be vulnerable, both with themselves and with the people around them, because often what EOS will do is it will force you to address the root cause of issues in the business. And in fact, not often, that's EOS's job to do that. And often the people at the top are part of the root cause of the business. So we have to be willing to own our part in whatever dysfunction is happening in the business. And so that means we need to have some tough conversations about who the right people are, potentially even as an owner, like, am I really the right person to be running this organization? That doesn't always come up, but I just want to, those are the types of conversations we need to have, open and honest conversations. Not every business owner or team is willing to go there. And, we flag it. I think most people think they're willing to go there until they're actually there. But we do like to point that out. We need, people who are truly growth oriented and willing to be vulnerable and humble enough to understand what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are. If they really ultimately we're there to work for the greater good of the entire organization. The other thing I will say is that EOS it's not a quick fix. And so occasionally I'll run into companies that are, they're looking for a Hail Mary. It's a last ditch attempt to turn the business around. And we need runway to do what we do. So I would say it can work in turnaround situations. It depends, but we need time to do what we need to do. So that's the other situation I would flag. It can work in any size organization, but typically larger organizations have a lot of these things in place because that's how you get large in the first place, right? But Jen, I think, again, did a very good job of describing, what an ideal client looks like for us, especially from a demographic point of view. And I would just emphasize from a psychographic point of view that commitment to growth, openness, and honesty.
So let's double click on the beginning days of an engagement. Let's call it the first 30 days. What are some of the tougher questions that you ask the C-suite at that point that will get them thinking about some of the tough issues, and B, may help you realize and them realize that they're not ready for EOS?
I'll take that. So The accountability chart is the first thing we do as a tool. We do a little bit of, teaching before that, and that is often either a breakthrough or a breakdown moment, in as much as or both at the same time. Yeah, good catch. Because we're really defining what accountability looks like, and many teams have not actually. They've sensed that accountability is missing, but they don't know what it looks like. And when they start to really get what it looks like, some people are like, "Oh, finally," and some people are like, "I'm out of here. Like, this is scary," right? Because either they realize that they're not that there's some insecurity there in their role, and now they're going to actually be held accountable to something specific, or secondly, it forces the leadership team to have those initial tough conversations, like, are we the right people in the right seats at this leadership team level? And we're inviting them to be open and honest with each other, and that's kind of where the rubber hits the road, and where they're realizing, wow, okay, this is not theoretical anymore. We actually have to be open and honest. And here's the litmus test. And so sometimes things can go sideways. And I worked with a team once where at the end of focus day, well, first of all, and obviously there's people sometimes in the room who don't end up in a seat on the leadership team, and that can be awkward as well. So it is uncomfortable. We have a saying: we need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable if this process is going to work, because everyone says, "Hey, we got to get out of our comfort zone here. That's how we grow." Well, yeah, that's in theory, that all sounds nice, but when you're actually sitting in discomfort, it doesn't feel good. Right? And it's our job as implementers to sit there with them. And I assure you, we're feeling uncomfortable as well, but it's our job just to normalize that. So really, first day is I think the accountability chart is the start of this conversation. We get into rocks, and then accountability from there becomes a conversation in the organization, which will keep coming up. But that's really where the rubber hits the road and where it starts. Jen, anything to add to that?
I think that was great.
I'll add in that I've actually borrowed the accountability chart exercise with clients as a fractional CMO, and they really have nothing to do with marketing. They have to do about bottlenecks and things getting done or not getting done. And I've had clients where I'm talking with the CEO and he's like, or she's like, by the way, any ideas on why our productivity as a team is not where it should be? And that has nothing to do with being a fractional CMO, right? That's really an operational issue. And so I pull out the accountability chart. I said, let's do a quick little exercise here. And for those who aren't familiar, the accountability chart is what's the position and who is responsible for it. And often you end up with an accountability chart where you have, specific responsibilities, and you have either multiple people responsible for them, and ultimately you just need to have one person who's accountable.
Right. The saying is, when two people are accountable, no one is accountable, because accountability only exists at the individual agency level.
Right. And then the other scenario is you have a whole bunch of different responsibilities, but you see the same person's name appearing multiple times who's responsible for each one. And, a person can only do so much and manage so much. So that's the other side of the coin. That's a problem. And just doing that exercise and just holding it up to, the CEO saying, here's your problem is just an aha moment and a wow moment where they realize, oh, okay, we need to work on that. So it's a great exercise, the accountability chart.
I was even thinking a step back, when we talk to a CEO and we say, okay, like, why don't we come in and meet with your team? We can share more with them about EOS, learn more about you, and then we can decide if it makes sense to work together. The first question we say is, well, who should be in the room? And sometimes they'll say, oh, I've got, 14 people on my leadership team. Whoa. So even just deciding who is going to be in the room to start having that conversation and start making those decisions about what the structure for the leadership team should look like, that can often be a point of huge friction with teams where there is a ton of people around the table. As you just said, multiple people accountable for the same things, or people accountable for everything with a lot of doers underneath them. In cases where you have family members, where there's a bunch of people in the family who are owners in the business but do not truly own their seats, there's a lot of dynamics that come into play immediately around people.
And the principle also around accountability chart is we say structure first, people second. So we want to take a step back and try and, as much as possible, just forget everything we know about the business and who works where, and just say, what's the right structure for this business? Like, without, not just like, oh, who do we have and where can we, put them to work? It's just like, let's pretend we have nobody and we just need to create a structure. And so that can be liberating, but it also brings up complications in as much as when we start thinking about it, somebody who there's just not a seat for someone who we think of as a leader in the organization. So, and the principle behind that structure is that every business at the most basic level really just has three main functions we call a marketing and sales function for, creating demand and turning demand into sales or customers, an operations function for how we either create the product or deliver the service, or maybe both of those things, and then a financial function where we're measuring inflows, measuring outflows, acquiring assets, managing assets. So those are the three sort of building blocks, or the kind of like the bare minimum. We need those three seats in place, and then from there we can break those up if need be, if it makes sense for the business. But that's where we start, and that again is just can often be a revelation for businesses. Like, okay, this is how we need to think about the business in terms of structure.
Okay, now let's go a little bit further down the path. So let's fast forward. It's now maybe 90 days in, maybe 120 days in. Now you started to identify maybe some functional gaps in the business where there are some seats that need to be filled. How do you approach that? And how do you make that call? Specifically related to fractionals, do you come across businesses where there are seats that need to be filled, but maybe the company doesn't need a full-time person? Maybe they need a fractional. What does that look like?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jen.
I'll go ahead and start here. This happens all the time, Robert. And I've thought about this preparing for this podcast, that at the beginning of every business, every seat is fractional, right? Like you've got one entrepreneur and they are a fractional CMO and a fractional CFO and a fractional CTO, right? Like they are doing everything.
They're in multiple seats probably. Yeah.
Lots of hats, lots of seats.
Exactly. And even, sometimes we come in and there's 2, 3, 4, 5 people on the team and still they're sitting in multiple seats. So fractional is very normal. It's just whether it's one person sitting in multiple seats or different fractionals sitting in different seats. But I think that's very normal. It happens often. I have a client I started with recently whose many seats on their leadership team are held by fractional people. And that's often a great starting point for folks where the leader is used to being in charge and making all of the decisions and having, 20 individuals reporting into them. And they start to say, you know what, we need some strategic leadership around the table who's ready to be in this with me, own this with me, but I can't afford to hire somebody full time. So it happens quite often in my experience.
Yeah. And just back to your original question, Robert, all of those things that we talk about in terms of people, those are just issues. So they end up on an issues list. For instance, new CMO, right? Where we need a CMO, hire a CMO. That would be an issue. And that would come out of that exercise. It's not our job as implementers to tell them what their issues are. It's just our job to give them the tool. And I mean, the tool kind of tells them in plain language what the issue is, right? As you pointed out in your example, like just look at it. You can see where the gaps are. They end up on an issues list. And as we move into, so there's 3 foundational days that we do with the team. We get all the tools in place. And then we move into what's called a quarterly cadence or quarterly pulsing, where we're running their quarterlies typically over about a 2-year period until they kind of gain self-sufficiency and can do it themselves. And during those quarterlies, a great issue is a key hire like that. So it's up to them to decide. Sometimes that, whether there's budgetary constraints, again, another case for a fractional, but they get to decide when it makes sense for them to give roles away. Because you're right, typically in a smaller organization, we do the accountability chart. Somebody or maybe more than one person is in multiple roles, And they have to decide when it makes sense to give one of those roles away or hire for one of those roles. And again, not our job to decide when that would be, but we're maybe subtly putting pressure on it. Like, hey, like, would this solve a lot of the issues? Because typically when you start looking at issues, Robert, like 80% of your issues are either people issues or sometimes process issues. But at the root cause of most issues is a people issue. So not always, but that's certainly the first place to look. So when you start thinking about hiring, you realize that as much as there's a cost associated, it is actually often the thing that will help you.
And do you ever get into conversations where everybody around the table has identified, okay, we need to fill this seat, but the revenue's not there to hire a full-timer, so a fractional would make sense at this stage.
All the time.
And then you get pushback from the CEO and maybe some others around the table who are like, well, I can't see how somebody who's not going to be working for me full-time can do as good a job as somebody who is going to be 100% 24/7 committed to my business.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair concern, and I think it's really case by case. I mean, I think it's an option worth exploring for teams. I think for many teams, it is a truly viable option that they just have some reticence about, just having not had the experience. So, I mean, my encouragement to entrepreneurs is try it out. If it works, great, and if it doesn't, I mean, the other beauty of a CMO is they're not an employee. You don't have to go through employment law and so on. So presumably, and so, it's just like, you can try it. That's our philosophy, is like, you don't know until you've tried it. Sometimes it's better to make a decision, unless it's business critical. You want to make decisions. Like ideally, EOS is forcing you and helping you to make decisions more quickly, so that, if you fail, at least you're failing quickly and you can make another better decision. But my encouragement is always just, hey, you don't know until you've tried it.
So I had a client recently who was making this exact debate. When we started working together, it was just her and her husband in the business, and they were deciding what the structure of their leadership team was going to look like. And, we had a few conversations about, should we go fractional? Should we hire full time? And so I think there is a lot of cases in which fractional makes sense, which is times when, maybe it's as we talked about earlier, it's a transition period of sort of the CEO being the only strategic decision maker to starting to bring on some strategic folks. Maybe it's a budgetary issue. Maybe it's a short-term issue. Maybe it's let's get someone great in here at a senior level to model what great looks like. So we then, when we go to hire for it, we have a better sense for what we need. My guidance to her was, the most important thing to me is that we're going to get someone here who owns this, right? You have enough people who are doing what you tell them to do. We need people who are sitting at this table with you, owning it, making strategic decisions with you. So if we can get that in a fractional capacity, beautiful.
Yeah, that's a great distinction. That leadership component, we're building a leadership team. That's one of our primary responsibilities as implementers, is to help the entrepreneur build a true leadership team. Well, you have people on the leadership team with executive function. We're not telling them how to run marketing. We're saying, figure it out. Tell us here's what we need you to accomplish. Take it away, right? So, I think Jen explained that very well, in as much as we want someone on that team who can, at the very least, give us a picture of what a true marketing leader would.
I have a friend who's an EOS implementer, and I was talking to him about his experience being an EOS implementer for the last few years. And he was telling me how much he loved it, like you have been, EOS Life, etc., great things. And at the end, he kind of sneaks in. And also, there's something satisfying about being able to sit across the table from a CEO and just tell them they're wrong.
Well, you know what? We do have the advantage of a proven system to fall back on, right? So it's not, the nice thing is, it's not me telling them they're wrong. It's kind of like, here are a bunch of principles that have been tried and tested, and here's what we've seen over and over again works and what doesn't work. So this is not my opinion I'm sharing here. I mean, don't get me wrong. I have opinions, and occasionally I will share them, but that's not my job. My job is to defend this framework. And so, I mean, I think there's a bit of, we can separate, there's no conceit. It's not, when we do that, it's us taking the accumulated learning, not just of my practice, but of, there's hundreds of us who do this, and we're knowledge sharing all the time. And we have a pretty good set of best practices that we are pretty confident, pointing at when they're not being followed. So maybe that's a better way of framing it. But yes, I don't know if that's the ultimate satisfaction, but there is a certain confidence that comes from working with a proven process and system. So, Jen, do you have another experience to share about that? Or?
I was just gonna say, as you shared that, Robert, I thought, have I ever said that to somebody? Have I ever told a CEO you're wrong? And I don't know that I have. And as I was reflecting on that, I thought, I think my approach, it tends to be more of the Socratic method, right? Which so when a CEO wants to do something, that in my brain I'm going, this is a terrible idea. Do not do this. This is not going to work for you. This is going to keep you stuck where you're at. I tried to, because nobody likes being told what to do. Again, I'm a mom to a 4-year-old. If I tell him what to do, that is not going to go over well, right? Whereas if I can figure out a way to, ask questions and say, well, what's going to happen when this happens? And is that the clearest way? And how is your team going to know who to go to with that question? And, is this really going to get you where you want to, I had a team recently, for example, who said, we're going to have 2 integrators. We're going to have 2 integrators instead of a visionary and integrator. And I said, okay, but who's really making the call on this? And isn't that the reason why you brought me in the first place? Because you're stuck. You're both trying to do everything. Don't you need to really divide and conquer to get where you want to go to? So really trying to help them get there on their own and think through why things may or may not work. But I maybe one day, Robert, I'll get to tell a CEO, you are wrong and I am right.
Jen, what Jen's pointing to is that we are not consultants. And if our job is to teach the system, so we're teaching it, we're coaching them on how to use the system. So that's where, we're coming saying you're wrong or that this does not align. But Jen's approach is absolutely, I think the highest, which is the highest function or the highest way for us to present as, coaches, facilitators, and teachers in the room. It's not our job to tell them they're wrong. It's our job just to point out that this is the way this system works. You can take it or leave it, but if you leave it, it's just going to be harder and take you longer. So, and that's certainly what I aspire to do. I mean, I think what I appreciate about this work is that, it's not my job to go in there and impress people. It's my job just to go in and tell the truth. And so it means that I don't have to be someone different. There's no pretense when I'm in the room. I don't have to be someone different in the room than I'm being in my normal life. And to Jen's point, it's my job just to ask good questions, not to give them the answers. And I think there's a temptation. This was certainly early in my career as an implementer, coming from more of a consulting background. I'm like yourself, Robert, a CMO or was it was tempting to kind of want to be an expert, and we have opinions and experience, but that's not my job. So we have to be careful to align with, I think, with the way Jen positioned it. And it's not our job, to tell someone they're wrong, but it is our job to guide them to what we think is going to be the best outcome for the business based on a lot of accumulated knowledge and some basic principles. So
it's almost like you were describing yourself as a journalist, right? I'm here to ask the right questions. I'm here to tell the truth. All right. Yeah. And there's a lot of similarities there.
I love that. So Robert, I actually, if you don't mind, speaking of questions, would you mind if I asked you a question?
Go for it.
Okay. So in your experience, either with your own clients or through your network of fractional folks, I'm wondering if there's ever been something that's come up that was a concern about EOS, a negative experience with EOS, something where people said, oh, I'm not sure about this EOS thing, that there's any myths out there that we could dispel. Does anything come to mind?
So Jen, you're a mind reader. Either that or if you hacked my screen, because my next question was literally that there are fractionals, who have clients, and they see there's a need for, some system upgrades, shall we say, and they know about EOS, but they may be hesitant to bring in an EOS implementer because they might see them as a potential competitor, either to what they're doing, especially in the case of a fractional COO, right? They might see EOS as a competitor. They may also see EOS as something that's not viable from a budgetary perspective because EOS does cost something. And if one of the, let's say it's a fractional CFO, right? They're responsible for the bottom line. And all of a sudden they're recommending this major spend for a client. It could be major, it may not be major, depends on the revenue size of the company, et cetera. But those are some of the resistance points that can happen from a fractionals perspective. Kind of thinks EOS might be the right thing here, but maybe will hesitate to pick up that phone and make the call. So I would say that kind of answers your question, right?
Yeah. So let me jump in on the budgetary side, and then Jeremy, happy to hand that over to you. So one of our values at EOS is help first. So we give EOS away for free all the time. So Traction, if you read it, it literally tells you step by step, here's how to sit down with your leadership team and build an accountability chart. There are literally hundreds of thousands of companies around the world who have self-implemented EOS. So I would say nobody should look at this and say it's too expensive for us to do. There's ways to tap into the tools. There's, resources, blogs, videos to help you do it on your own. EOS implementers, part of our role is to help people do this. And so we will give away EOS workshops to anybody who wants one. I have done them multiple times for single person companies where I'm saying, let me show you how to use these tools really well in your business. And, I have no pretense that you're about to become a client of mine, but here you go. I want you to have these tools so that you can get better. Maybe one day in the future that could become a client, could become a referral, but our value is to help first and just make sure people have these tools. So I would say don't let that be a hang up, that there's always ways to get this without it costing a ton of money. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just add, for the right client, EOS is not a major cost for a target market client. And the value is huge. So, that sounds like I'm selling it, I know, but to Jen's point, if they want to look at it, many of us will just give you 90 minutes. We can show you what it looks like. It's not a hard sell. It's really just an educational workshop on how EOS works and what's going on in your business and so on. Take advantage of that. Any EOS implementer will do that for a small business. I will say, around the competition question, is a case where a fractional, is threatened by EOS because maybe they don't feel like they're the right person for that seat. And again, EOS could come in and some people feel exposed by EOS. So I would say, it's going to tell the truth. So that being said, there's nothing inherently about EOS that would threaten a fractional's role in the organization unless they truly were not working in the best interest or for the greater good of the organization. So I don't want to paint make a blanket statement about that, but EOS is there for the greater good of the business. And so any COO who brings this in, hopefully is going to get a medal. They're just saying, hey, what's the best thinking out there on how we can run a great organization? Are they the right person to be a COO? Well, EOS may bring that up as well. But if they're confident, if they know what they're doing, and if they're confident in their own abilities, and there's absolutely no threat from EOS whatsoever.
Right. EOS just becomes a tool that the fractional COO is bringing into the organization to help the operations in general. And it's not a replacement. You still need to have a fractional COO because the COO is focused on different things than an EOS implementer is focused on, I would imagine, right?
Absolutely.
In fact, it lets them focus. It lets them focus on what they need to. And to your point, Robert, yeah, you've got this great marketing plan, but it you know it, it involves the entire organization. There needs to be buy-in. There needs to be execution from not probably just the marketing department, but it probably depends on other departments as well. And it's very hard to do that without these types of tools in place and the accountability that would make that possible.
So we work with our clients 5 days a year, right? We are not in the day-to-day of the business. We are there periodically to help them check in, make sure things are still aligned, and course correct to make sure they're on track to achieve their goals. We are not there in the day-to-day doing the work, making the tough calls, holding people accountable, checking in week by week to keep things on track. The integrator is the most important, I would argue, position on the accountability chart. So every great business is going to need someone in that COO integrator type seat. So as you said, this system is all about making really crystal clear what it's about shining a flashlight into the organization to making it really crystal clear who's doing what and that results are being accomplished. So if you are good at what you do in any seat, then this is a great gift to you rather than something that should be threatening.
Is that integrator role always a COO function, or can there be a COO and an integrator working with the company as well?
Yeah, good. It depends on the structure of the organization. So, like the head of operations could be different than the integrator for sure. So typically you'll see a sales leader and a finance leader, and there may be other types of leaders in the organization, but I can't answer that definitively, but there tends to be some overlap sometimes between operations, but the integrator and the head of operations are two distinct roles on an accountability chart. So, yeah. Jen?
I was just going to say, I feel like the term operations can mean very different things to very different people. I see at least 3 different uses for it. So one is where it is someone overseeing the day-to-day operations of the entire business. Other people use operations to define the delivery of the key products and services of the business. And other people use it to talk about the internal operations, the finance and HR. I think it can be confusing what we mean when we say operations, but yes, there are many cases in which there is an integrator and someone heading operations, but sometimes the COO is the integrator. So I would say it's all about what you mean by those words and what the business needs, of course.
I'm sure you both have many success stories of successful implementations of EOS into different businesses with clients. Well, let's focus on the negative for a minute. Epic fails. Can either of you share an experience where you did your job, but things just went sideways?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I've encountered a bit in some of the trade businesses where people are it's really hard to hire tradespeople these days. And accountability depends on being able to make people decisions. In other words, if this person isn't delivering, we need to replace them, right? And so I have seen situations where in a trade organization, they're so scared of letting go of somebody because it's so hard to find a replacement. And there's such a lack of qualified people that they just can't drive accountability in the organization. And it ultimately leads to the situations where nothing really changes over time. And they can't make the tough people decisions. It's not my job to tell them they have to do it, but it's my job to point out that you can't have accountability if there's no consequences. And there can't be consequences if you're not willing to let people go when they're not the right person in the right seat. And that fear of making tough people decisions, it was what holds a lot of businesses back and will cause them to kind of flatline or fail.
So that's it's better to have a bad employee than no employee at all kind of mindset.
Yeah, and that just doesn't work with what we're doing ultimately, right? But I don't know. Jen, what's your example?
It's so funny because the story I was going to share is a totally different industry, professional services, but exactly the same story of the tools make it very crystal. We said EOS is a flashlight. It shares who's doing their job and who is not. And it makes it this client was very crystal clear that this person was not doing their job. They missed their scorecard metrics every week. They would miss their rocks. They were not living the core values, and the person refused to make a change. And so when you don't make changes, you don't get results. So that comes back to the very beginning. We talked about who is a right fit for EOS, people who are willing to do things when issues come to light. If you don't, no changes, no results.
Yeah. And I want to acknowledge, like, dealing with people, letting people go is the toughest thing that an owner or leader has to do. But ultimately, it also is, in many cases, the easiest or the fastest way to, make a transformational change in the business.
Yeah, and I've had to live through that many times as a business owner in a former life, and I could say that when you're letting go of somebody for the right reason, which is simply they're not the right fit for that job, you're actually doing them a huge favor. And of course, they don't realize it in the moment. But I've had former employees come back to me, a couple of years later. I cross paths with them again, and we catch up. And they're like, by the way, thank you so much for firing me, because I moved on. I'm so much happier. I'm making more money. I have more opportunities. It was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. It's kind of like thank me later kind of thing, right?
Yes.
The toughest is when you got to let go of somebody because you just don't have money to pay them, but they're doing a great job. That's a really tough spot. But other than that, my experience has been it's actually you're doing somebody a favor by letting them move on.
And what a miserable life, right? To live to go to work every day where you spend most of our waking hours, to go to a place where you're a wrong person or in the wrong seat. So we talk about, right person is you love the work you do and you're really good at it. And right person means that you are aligned with the organization's core values. What a miserable life to go to a place where you're forced to do work that you don't like doing, that you're not good at, or that the people around you do not live with your core values. That is miserable for any human. Nobody wants that for themselves or for their loved ones. So I agree with you. Let's get everybody into right people, right seats in organizations that align with their values, that value their skill sets and what they have to bring. What a great world that would be if everybody could have that.
All right, let's wind this down. What message would you put on a billboard for millions of business owners to see as they drive by it on the highway of life every single day?
Well, I mean, just life is too short to, feel like you're a prisoner of your business.
That's a good one.
And, so many entrepreneurs get into that situation where, they think they're buying freedom by starting a business and they end up a prisoner of their business and its misery. And that's what we help.
Wow, that was really good, Jeremy. I picked Jeremy's. The first thing that came to mind
no
was it doesn't have to be this hard, but I think the way Jeremy said it was way better. So I vote for Jeremy's billboard.
Well, it's two different ways of saying it. It doesn't have to be this hard versus Jeremy's essentially get out of jail free card.
Yeah, I mean, not every business owner is at that stage yet. Hopefully they're not. But, sometimes when a client's interested in EOS and they don't end up going with it, we just say, oh, they're not in enough pain yet, so you have to be in a certain amount of pain to want to do this. It's not easy doing what we like going through this process. It demands something of you. So you have to be ready for that. And the benefits have to outweigh the costs. And you have to see that clearly before you want to do this. That's kind of a challenge to any entrepreneur if you care to take it.
Well said. We'll end on that philosophical note, which I think is the core of anybody, whether you're an entrepreneur or just a person living your life, that you've hit kind of the core issue right there. All right. How can people connect with both of you?
LinkedIn is probably the easiest. Jen Couldrey, or if you just type Jen Couldrey EOS, you can find my website.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Jeremy Robinson, EOS. If you either search that, I'm in Toronto. We both serve Southern Ontario region. So if you're anywhere in the Southern Ontario region, we can help you directly. And if you're not, we're happy to refer you to some great implementers in your region. So there's great implementers across North America. So happy to help
Across
you
the
with that
world.
as well. Across the world. That's right. We are EOS worldwide at this point. So yeah. Thanks
And
for
it's
having us, Robert. Yeah, I really appreciate
It's
you
my
taking
pleasure. One last question, though, is so you're very geographic. So does that mean that most of your clients, you're not working virtually, you're doing in person?
No, we can work virtually, and some implementers will have built virtual practices. And technically, I could work with clients anywhere. I just choose not to, be jumping on planes to serve clients. Some EOS implementers will do that. Jen has young kids. I just, it's just a lifestyle decision. It can be done virtually, so don't rule that out. I think there is a value in being in the room together, but it's not essential. I think it's preferable. That's all.
So that being said, my latest client is based in Mexico, and their team is distributed all across the US. So we are doing most of our sessions virtually, but I am very much looking forward to heading down to Mexico for a session someday soon.
I'll bet you're planning that session sometime in maybe February.
Exactly. That's exactly when we need to do the annual planning team. I've decided.
Just works out that way. Coincidence. All right,
So I
Jen.
Thanks again, Robert. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Jeremy, for joining us here on the Fractional Pros Canada podcast.
Thanks so much for having us, Robert.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Fractional Pros Canada podcast. If you're a fractional professional based in Canada, we'd love to have you join us in the Fractional Pros Canada Facebook group, the home for Canada's fractional community. It's where Canadian fractional executives connect, share insights, and help each other succeed. Until next time, I'm Robert Mendelson, Fractional CMO. May your impact be full-time, even if your hours are fractional.